Welcome to the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Our mission is to help executives become better cyber risk managers. We are your hosts. I'm Kip Boyle, CEO of Cyber Risk Opportunities.
And I'm Jake Bernstein, Cybersecurity Counsel at the law firm of Newman DuWors.
And this is the show where we help you become a better cyber risk manager.
The show is sponsored by Cyber Risk Opportunities and Newman DuWors LLP. If you have questions about your cybersecurity related legal responsibilities,
and if you want to manage your cyber risks just as thoughtfully as you manage risks in other areas of your business, such as sales, accounts receivable, and order fulfillment, then you should become a member of our Cyber Risk Managed program, which you can do for a fraction of the cost of hiring a single cybersecurity expert. You can find out more by visiting us at cyberriskopportunities.com and newmanlaw.com.
So, Kip, what are we going to talk about today?
Today, Jake, we're going to talk about how smaller companies are struggling to respond to the cybersecurity questionnaires that they're getting from their much larger customers and prospective customers.
And when you say cybersecurity questionnaires, what we're talking about is the supply chain risk management that's been going on all over the place, right?
Yeah, that's right. So what's happening is that if I'm a purchaser of outside services and I'm considering doing business with one of these companies, then I'm going to want to do my due diligence to make sure that they're a good cyber risk manager. I'm probably going to trust them with some of my data, some of my sensitive data, and I want to make sure that they're going to do a good job of taking care of it. And I think the urge here is a wonderful urge. Companies should be managing the cyber risks in their supply chain. There's no doubt about that. There's a lot of virtue in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But you and I both have customers that struggle to respond to these lengthy cybersecurity questionnaires that they're getting from large enterprises.
And today we're going to give you some insights into that struggle and how we've seen our clients handle it. And it is a struggle. These questionnaires are sometimes very long, very detailed. They request documentation in addition to really a self-assessment on many levels.
Yeah, exactly. So the customer I'm going to talk about today is a software as a service provider to the insurance industry.
And my client is a technology provider to large retailers.
Okay, so just let me paint out the context here a little bit more. So the economic driver again here is, they're trying to, these large enterprises are trying to manage their cyber risk in their supply chain, and I'm heavily influenced by the AICPA's SOC 2 report. They in that report, in that attestation, they refer to these outside organizations as service organizations, right? Because they're performing some service for the buyer. And the issue is that it's just all too common these days for a cyber attack against a large company to go through one of their smaller partners. And if you remember the Target credit card data breach, they're absolutely the poster child for this, although it's happened to many large enterprises, right? So Target, the retailer, 40 million credit card and debit card numbers were breached in 2013. And after the forensics were completed, turns out that they had a supplier portal, an internet-facing web app, and one of their refrigeration contractors, Fazio Mechanical, was actually compromised, caused the compromise of Target through that connection between them. So there's no doubt that this is a real thing. So if you're a listener and you're managing a larger enterprise, that's a big takeaway for you, is that you're vulnerable through your service organizations. And if you are a service organization and you're starting to get these kinds of questionnaires, or maybe you've been struggling with them for a while, know that this is because you are an attack vector. And what Jake and I are seeing is that every questionnaire that our customers are getting is different. There's no such thing right now as a standard questionnaire. I can't even count how many that I've seen that are different. And I'm seeing that most of them require somewhere between 4 and 8 hours to complete. How does that track with your experience, Jake?
That would be on the low side of time required. particularly when you look at the ones that are requiring documentation in addition to just answering questions.
Right. So it's 48 hours just to complete the first pass, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, no, that's like first draft. I mean,
Yeah.
these are a lot of the time these are major undertakings, and the problem is that they're not optional, because a lot of times the unspoken risk is that if you don't fill this out, you'll lose the work. And sometimes it's not unspoken; it's actually very clear. Do this or else, and that
Yeah.
is it's an uncomfortable position for a lot
Yeah.
of smaller businesses to be in.
Right. So this is part of the sales cycle for these small companies, right? Is they're describing to these large enterprises what are the benefits of working with them, and then part of that larger sales conversation is, oh, by the way, please fill out this cyber risk questionnaire. So, and most sales organizations have zero experience with this, right? They don't know how to answer these questions, and so they have to figure out, okay, who can I turn to in my organization as a service organization? Who's going to help me fill out these questionnaires, and how are we going to know what to put into what's a good answer, right? I mean,
Well,
it's hard to know.
it is, and one of the problems here is that some organizations will look at these questionnaires as sales blockers,
Mm-hmm.
and it will be incumbent on the sales team to clear the blocker. And so what I've seen is, let's just say, attempts at answering these that are done by sales guys who don't know and who don't understand either the legal force of what these questionnaires do and are for, and who probably don't understand the substance of what they're answering either. And that is a potential problem. That's as big of a problem as not answering the questionnaires at all.
Yeah, it's a big struggle. And the temptation, as you said, to just put down what you think the customer wants to hear, crossing your fingers and hoping that you never actually have to prove that, right? That it never actually comes up again. I mean, that temptation must be really strong to avoid what we see, with the hours and hours of work that goes into actually putting together a reasonable response.
It is, and in fact, it's particularly challenging when you are in the position of knowing you need this sale, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're in a growth mode, we need this revenue. A lot of the times the smaller companies aren't ready for these types of questionnaires, and it's a real unknown as to how these companies are supposed to deal with it, particularly since, as you said earlier, there's not a standardized form.
Right. There's not a standard form. There's not standard questions, right? It would be one thing if it was, well, we see the same questions all the time, but they keep coming in a different order, or if they're packaged differently, but it's not even that good.
It's not. And unfortunately, you also tend to see, for any given customer, the same form given to all vendors. And the problem with that is that not all vendors are somewhat different.
Mm-hmm.
So what you see is a great deal of redundancy or irrelevancy, but determining what's relevant or redundant takes a certain amount of expertise. And a lot of our clients don't have that expertise.
Right.
So it is these questionnaires are intimidating, but they're very important.
Right.
So how has your particular client struggled with this?
So it's been so enlightening for me to be a part of some of my smaller customers and the work that they're doing, because I've actually seen both sides of this, right? I've been on actually both sides of this transaction here. I've been part of a larger organization, and I've consulted to larger organizations that are trying to get their arms around this issue of cyber risk supply chain management. So I understand why they're doing this. But until I started assisting my smaller companies and some of them pursuing smaller deals, I really didn't understand the impact that it has on them. So this has been very good for me to see. But the one thing that I would say is that you were touching on it a moment ago, which is large enterprises are evaluating every one of their vendors using a one-size-fits-all process. And then the other sort of corollary to that is their perspective, not surprisingly, is well, what would we do, right? So if I'm a multi-billion-dollar organization and I'm buying services from a multi-million-dollar and sometimes small million-dollar service organizations, I mean that's just unrealistic to expect. For example, that you're going to even have a single dedicated cybersecurity person in these smaller service organizations isn't realistic. Their budgets can't even afford a single dedicated person. So that's another kind of mismatch that I see. And some of the deals that I've seen these questionnaires show up for, I mean, you're talking about a $500 a month service offering, right? For like a piece of
Exactly.
SaaS software or something like that. And even though a SaaS price point of $500 a month is probably giving the service organization, say, an 80% or a 70% margin, you're still, these small companies are saying, look, if I respond to these questionnaires in full and all the follow-up activities, I could lose all my profit for the first year or more. Because the deal size is not that great. And so one of the things that I've seen my customers do.
I was going to say, why don't you pause there for 1 second and just do some quick math. I have a client who I've worked with on this, and a lawyer is about $350 an hour. If it takes 10 hours, that's $3,500 just having your lawyer help you fill out one of these forms and get the documentation ready. At $500 a month,
that's a $6,000 annual deal, and I've just lost $3,500 of my $6,000 deal to my attorney.
Exactly, and even if you assume a 70% margin, you've spent 80% roughly of your profit through the entire first year to answer one questionnaire.
Yep. And so the economics are pretty straightforward, and that's exactly what's going on.
But here's the real pain point, right? Is that the economics are straightforward, but what if you have your sales guy fill out the questionnaire and then something goes wrong? Mm-hmm. Now suddenly what seemed painful by using up 80% of your profit for the first year could become bet the company litigation. That's even worse. So it's not as simple as saying, oh, well, the money doesn't work, so we're just going to fill this out quickly. Like, you could do that, but that is a huge risk.
And we know that small companies are, in the business of taking risks,
yep.
But, that I think that would exceed the risk appetite of just about anybody. Maybe Elon Musk would sleep well at night knowing that he's a big risk taker, but I don't know.
Perhaps he is.
How many other people would?
Yeah, it's a real rock and hard place situation.
Yeah, definitely. So the other thing that I'm seeing my customers say are things like, maybe I should just not pursue these smaller deals. Maybe I need to have a minimum deal size, and I'm just not going to consider anything less than that. That's one one way of dealing with this. Another way that I've seen my customers deal with this, and they've actually gotten some traction with this, and I was kind of surprised but glad, is they'll allocate a certain amount of effort to filling out a questionnaire. But then beyond that, let's say they'll say, well, I'll spend 2 hours working on this. But anything beyond 2 hours, and you, the large enterprise, are going to have to pay us to do that, $200 an hour, $250 an hour at cost, whatever it is. And essentially what the small organizations are saying, look, we understand that you need to do this due diligence, but we can't afford to keep up with you. So you're going to have to shoulder the vast majority of the cost of conducting this due diligence. So they're actually pushing back, and they're actually pushing the costs back onto the large organizations. And it doesn't work in every case, but I've seen it work.
And that's a big risk, right? Because you're basically telling your customer, that's fine, we'll do this, but we're going to put this cost onto you. That could backfire.
Yeah, it absolutely could backfire. But if you are in a situation where the economics are as we've just described it, and you're thinking to yourself, well, if I push back and ask for them to pay for it, and if they choose not to, oh well, I'm not going to take the deal because I can't make any money on it. So it's almost a can't lose proposition, because if they say yes, well then you might be able to win some actual profitable business. So
it's true.
So it kind of pencils like that. On the other side of the equation, if you look at the large enterprise perspective, if they say to a small service organization, well, no, we're not going to pay for you to do the due diligence, just forget it and deal off, we're not going to go any further. Well, one of the consequences to that in terms of innovation, right, economic innovation, technical innovation, is these large enterprises just simply will not be able to take advantage of a lot of the new latest offerings in the market space because these are startup organizations, small companies, and that's where all the innovation is coming from. So there's a real potential blocker here for more innovation and more economic benefit if these smaller deals just can't seem to be put together.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, this is there's not a good answer for this yet at all.
No,
and it is becoming, I think, a serious concern for smaller companies.
But a recommendation that I would give to a large enterprise that's in this situation is think about how can you scale the due diligence burden. Right. So if you know you're going to be taking a look at a service organization, how can you thoughtfully decrease that burden so that it's affordable to that small organization? What kinds of things can you do there? Can you cut down the questionnaire? Maybe you can come at it from what 20% of all these questions, if I just asked 20% of them, which ones would give me 80% of the risk management benefit?
Exactly. I mean, you apply the Pareto principle as much as possible, as anywhere you can, and that's always a good idea. I think, though, that what larger organizations can do and should do is take more of a rifle approach as opposed to a shotgun approach to risk management with their smaller vendors. In other words, I mean, it's maybe I'm just restating the Pareto principle here, but be mindful of what you're asking. And, if you're asking a vendor who's never going to touch personal data about their privacy policy, you're just wasting their time. Right. And this goes beyond, maybe this goes beyond the Pareto principle, which looks more at, what 20% gets you 80% of the way there. I would actually say that if you're asking irrelevant questions, you're actually outside the Pareto principle in general. Like you're in left field, and you shouldn't be.
And I want to give you a great example of that, because this came up recently. So a large enterprise had passed off a questionnaire, and in the questionnaire there were a bunch of questions about payment card industry data security standard, PCI DSS, and the large enterprise, the person at the large enterprise was kind of an administrative person, right? Not a cybersecurity expert. And so they just passed, they just sort of said, here, fill this out. But credit card data wasn't at all in the scope of this deal. And yet here are all these questions about PCI. And so the service organization pushed back and said, we're not going to answer questions about PCI because it doesn't make any sense in this context. But the person at the large enterprise didn't understand enough about what was going on here to be able to say, you know what, that's totally reasonable. Let's strike those out of the questionnaire. Instead, they dug in their heels and they said, oh no, you have to answer every one of these questions no matter what. And the tone that the large enterprise representative kind of took was, oh, are you trying to pull a fast one on me? Are you trying to, cut down your workload at our expense? It was a very accusatory response of
Well, and
not well informed.
and that goes back to so the issue where you have a sales guy who sees it as a sales blocker on the vendor side, you've got the same problem on the big enterprise side, right?
Absolutely.
You have account managers or in-house just vendor managers who are, they're acquisitions guys, right? Or maybe that's the wrong word, resource management, things like that.
Well, they're buyers.
They're buyers. They just want to get this stuff done.
That's right.
Right.
Yep.
And when they see, they're not cybersecurity professionals. They don't understand the significance of what they're asking. They just know that in order for this to be signed off on by security and legal, that these questions have to be done. So
it's a deal blocker for them.
It's a deal blocker for them, and they want to get their job done. I understand, I get it, but the situation is probably going to get worse before it gets better. You're going to need to have both sides take a reasonable approach to dealing with this.
Right. So let's talk about what that might be like. So one of the things that I'm seeing out there in the market space is vendors that are starting to emerge, and and this is exactly the pain point that they're trying to address. So you got like a vendor that I've been hearing a lot about lately is called Security Scorecard. And what they do is they provide kind of a credit report style numeric score, and it says, this organization, based on our interrogations of their the vulnerabilities that we're seeing in their internet-facing servers, and us looking at the kinds of chatter about them that's going on in social media, like here's their score in a 300 to 800 range, right? So it's a lot like the kinds of individual credit scores that you and I have maintained on us in order to say how good of a payer are we in a credit granting situation. And so I actually have a very, very large customer that's saying, if we can't do vulnerability scans as part of our due diligence because the service organization won't let us, well, then we're going to go buy a report from Security Scorecard, and we're going to use that instead. And so there are definitely vendors, right, entrepreneurs trying to come into the space and provide a way of addressing this pain point. The thing about Security Scorecard that I looked at and I thought was really interesting is it seems like that would be a very easy thing to game. I would love to know more about how they do that, because I talked with one customer who got scanned by Security Scorecard, and they were just livid at some of the gross inaccuracies that they saw in that report, because Security Scorecard thought that they were scanning all the right networks, but they got it wrong. They overscanned in some places, underscanned in others, and so it's a pretty blunt instrument at this point.
It is a blunt instrument, and I'd say that it's also very automated, which is both. Automation is really important in security, but it is also a major risk factor when you over automate without thought. And Security Scorecard is a useful tool. Much like Qualys, vuln scans and network scans are useful tools. Like I totally am on board with the concept, but it's too tempting. It's dangerously tempting to say, well, we're going to make decisions based off Security Scorecard, and
on the assumption that it's apps that it's high fidelity, high quality data. And the thing about it is that if you look at the questions on the questionnaires, only a very small fraction of those questions actually have to do with internet facing security postures. There's so many other things that you need to know about, their change control and that sort of thing. And Security Scorecard, and other vendors like them, I don't know how they could address those things. So it's just one little sliver of what's going on.
It's interesting, just kind of a last thought here is that because the GDPR is everywhere and ever present, did you know that there's actually a specific right to basically appeal automated decision processes? If you're an individual, so the GDPR doesn't apply to businesses; it only applies to individual, natural persons. But the concept is that we're already recognizing that an automated decision process can introduce a level of unfairness into a procedure, right? And think about, as an individual, a credit check is a good example. It's an automated process. And if you think something's wrong with that, you actually have the right to challenge that under European law. Now, imagine if you're a business in this situation and for whatever reason, there is some automation going on, perhaps something like Security Scorecard, and it's causing you to lose business. Where do you appeal? Who do you go to? Yeah. And so it wouldn't surprise me at some point if that idea of an appeal of an automated decision process is extended.
It reminds me of a customer of mine who got they ended up on a spam blacklist. And the details of that are really interesting. But the problem that they had was that there was an automated decision to blacklist them. And so it essentially took their email systems offline because nobody would accept an email from them anymore. And it took the better part of a week for them to find a living human being who had the authority to revoke the blacklist status. And it was very painful for them.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
So, well, that wraps up this episode of the Cyber Risk Management Podcast. Today, we talked about how smaller companies are struggling to respond to the cybersecurity questionnaires of their much larger customers. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today on the Cyber Risk Management Podcast.
Remember that cyber risk management is a team sport and needs to incorporate management, your legal department, HR, and IT for full effectiveness.
And management's goal should be to create an environment where practicing good cyber hygiene is supported and encouraged by every employee. So if you want to manage your cyber risks and ensure that your company enjoys the benefits of good cyber hygiene, then please contact us and consider becoming a member of our Cyber Risk Managed program.
You can find out more by visiting us at cyberriskopportunities.com and newmanlaw.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.